Thank you. Hello, everyone. Happy Trans Awareness Week. It's wonderful to be in community, especially after going through the outcome for the election and hearing about who will be um, in the presidential area for the next 4 years. But before we start, I just want to recognize and honor the original occupants and stewards of the land where we now gather, or especially for myself, where I'm tuning in. I am tuning in from the traditional home of the Coast Salish people and the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We continue to honor the adaptations and the forced assimilation and the resilience and the creativity of Native people, past, present, and future. We also encourage all of you to consider your responsibilities to the people and land, both here and elsewhere, and to stand in solidarity with Native, Indigenous, and First Nations people and their sovereignty, cultural heritage, and lives. But we also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor upon which our country, state, and institutions are built on. We remember that our country is built on the labor of enslaved people who were kidnapped and brought to the US from the African continent, and recognize the continued contributions of their survivors. We also acknowledge all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented people who have contributed to the building of the country and continue to serve within our labor force. We also pause to acknowledge all unpaid caregiving. To the people who contributed this immeasurable work and their descendants, we acknowledge our inedible mark on the space in which we gather today. It is also our collective responsibility to critically interrogate these histories, to repair harm, to honor, protect, and sustain this land. Bula and Talo for everyone. It's such a wonderful opportunity to be in space with you today, especially for our Talanoa dialogue. We gather to engage in a lot of the important conversations that our wonderful panelists have agreed to take out of their very busy schedule to join us today regarding about healthcare access, gender affirming care, and the safety of our trans and gender diverse communities. This dialogue is a part of our Trans Awareness Week. As we all know, it is a time to uplift the voice of our transgender individuals and advocate for policies that ensures our well-being and rights, as well as to have critical conversation on issues that remembers each of our voice is powerful and can contribute to meaningful change. Today, we create a space where stories, experiences, and ideas are shared openly and with respect, especially recognizing our diversities within our community. Our esteemed panelists all bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and a passion to this discussion today. They're also leaders, advocates, and community members who have dedicated themselves to advancing transgender rights and ensuring equitable access to care and safety for all our communities. Um, it's such a pleasure to be with everyone today. I know we just have a short moment for conversation, so I'll go ahead and quickly start us off. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use our questions and answers text box. And that way, when we get to the questions and answers portion, we'll be able to let them to our panelists for discussion. Um, yes. Okay, I guess we can just move into quick introductions and turn the time over to our wonderful panelists who are able to join us today. If we can do it popcorn style, it'll be just name, pronouns, where you're tuning in from, and a brief description about what are some of the phenomenal work that you're currently doing with community. I can go ahead. I can turn it over to Sebastian if you want to start us off.
Sure, I'll start us off, Adriana. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I am Sebastian Smith, or Cy for short, SY. Pronouns are he and him. I am currently located on Muskogee Creek People's Land, which is also known as Atlanta, Georgia. I am the organizing director at the formerly known National Center for Trans Equality, which is now Advocates for Trans Equality. And the work that I do at A4TE is really I lead up a lot of our mobilization and outreach activities. And then I also manage a lot of our external relationships, be it with community members, be it with community-based organizations, other national organizations, state-based organizations. So I manage a lot of those relationships as well. And that's enough about me. And I'll hand it over to Mariah.
I knew you were going to do that. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariah Moore. My pronouns are she, her. I'm located in New Orleans, Louisiana, or Chitimacha or Babancha land, which means land of many tongues. I am the director of policy and programs at Transgender Law Center. And so, what that means is that I lead our department in not only implementing, but developing our programming to reach our priority stakeholders. Right now, we're really focused on our rural and southern states and our youth located in those states primarily, folks providing direct services, folks engaged in policy work. And one of the pieces of our programming that I'm particularly proud of is our Black Trans Circles program, which builds leadership pathways for Black trans women and femmes, as well as our national coalition, which AMASI is a part of, which is responsible for not only guiding our organization, but updating and drafting language to include in our Trans Agenda for Liberation, which we use as our organization's North Star. And I will pass it to Danny.
Hey everyone, so excited to be joining you all. I'm Danny Eschini. I use they, them pronouns or she, her pronouns. Those are both great. I'm currently in unceded Powhatan Confederacy territory, also known as Alexandria, Virginia, which is the Northern Virginia just outside of DC. Yeah, I'm the founder and executive director of Gender Justice League and Trans Pride Seattle. I live and work and split my time between both Seattle and the DC area. Um, and yeah, just really honored to be here. I guess the other reason why I'm on this panel, just for context, is I have been working on increasing access to gender affirming care for a very long time, over 20 years. Um, so that's kind of why I'm here. And I will pass it to Jill.
Hi everyone. Jill is she, her pronoun. I'm really honored to be at this conversation today. I am dialing in from my home in Tacoma, Washington, which is the traditional territory of the Puyallup people. I am the organizer for Asian Trans Sister, which is the largest peer community group for Pan-Asian trans women and Pan-Asian trans femme identified folks. I am an immigrant from China. I created Asian Trans Sisters, born out of desire to really create a community space for a community that's really underrepresented. And yeah, I'm really glad to be in this space today to learn from other experienced trans organizers. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the hard work that you do for our community, especially bringing our community in and being able to provide that level of support for them, especially in spaces that's not very welcoming to our community. We all know how taxing legislative and policy work can be. And I really do appreciate your time taking to be here with us. We're going to roll things along. Some of the I guess our icebreaker question that we have, it is, what is one intention or hope you have for this conversation? And I can pass it to Mariah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one hope that or intention I have for this conversation is that folks are reminded of their skill set, their experience, and what brought them to the work. I was just telling my team this yesterday when I returned to work. Even though we're experiencing something that we had scenario planned for, even though surprising, we knew that this was a possibility. And I think that just leaning into our purpose and the reason why we come to work every day, and the fact that we've always, persevered through whatever we faced, is what we need to continue to hold on to. So I hope that folks, really receive that through this conversation. Yeah.
I'll jump out there next, Adriana. I think just to feel, right? I think just to have a space to feel what we need to feel, and just like Mariah said, tap back into the things that we've always done. The fight is not new to us, unfortunately. Maybe it looks different than what it looked a while ago, but the fight is not new. So I definitely want all of us to take time to continue to have open dialogue like this, to be transparent, feel the feels, feel them together, because some of our community members don't have other community members to feel this thing with, right? And they are feeling alone. So the more we can have these types of open dialogue conversations where things are super relaxed and people can feel what they need to feel, and then we start talking about action. We start talking about what worked, what have we done that worked, and what can we try new that could potentially work.
Thank you, Sebastian. I hear a lot about the healing. I know a lot of our community is worried about what the next 4 years, especially with the outcome of the election. And a lot of our organizers continue to be that hope that allows our community to continue on with life, but also be there for them when the support is needed. Jill, what is your kind of like hopes and takeaways for the conversations today?
Yeah, I'll say that, just after seeing the election result, I've been feeling really scared. But, at the same time, I think about the fact that this event, this conversation is being hosted after election day, and then we have Trans Awareness Week and Trans Day of Remembrance happening each year after election day. What that says to me is that no matter what will happen in the election result, this was always going to be a generational fight, and that there's no other way of getting around communities supporting each other. And so that's, irregardless of the outcome of election. And so I think, like Mariah and Sai said, I think communities need to find solutions together, and I'm really thankful to be in a room with a lot of folks with a lot of experience and knowledge, and I want to find ways to fight back.
Thank you, Jill. Danny, you're no stranger to this work. I've seen a lot of the efforts. I've also seen you in action when we're in Olympia. What are some of the intentions and hope you have for our conversations today? And especially since we have our community here listening in and trying to find ways they can engage for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I think my hope is that, as everybody said, I'm just really grateful that we're all able to be together and to inspire each other with our stories and experiences and talk about the things that we've done that have worked, big and small. And my intention is to hopefully help people leave here feeling inspired in terms of like where we can all contribute. And I know that I've been feeling a lot of like fear and sadness and anxiety about the election, and I'm hoping to provide some insight into just like how bureaucratic things can be in this work and in this country. And it sounds terrible to say, but that somehow gives me hope in that it's really hard to change things. It's taken us so long to change things. And so I'm hopeful that that will slow down any reverses to past changes. And so that's my intention, is to also try to provide some of that context of like in 2016, what we saw after the last election. And I hope to just like inspire people to think about how we can all work together and resist and put more roadblocks in the way to keep what we have and then move things forward as well.
Thank you for that feedback. I think doing this work, it's also like building together with community, working alongside other unapologetic trans and gender diverse activists who are also on the ground, not only providing the care that our community, but also holding space for people to seek refuge, whether it be through mental health counseling or shared space that people continue to engage with every day. I guess we can go into our next question for like the current political climate. I know this is one of the most important conversations. We all know what Project 2025 will look like, and especially with this new administrations and some of the anti-trans policies that they're looking to put in place. Is how do you see national policies evolving in terms of healthcare access and gender affirming care for transgender individuals? And what key policy battles are being fought, and where do you see the potential for progress and where community can come into support? Um, Sebastian, if you want to start us off.
Sure, absolutely. I don't mind starting us off. So I think that part of what we need to kind of look forward to is protecting what we already have, so to speak, right? So the administrative rules in the state, I think that the fight for me is going to be at the state level, right? We're going to have to really think about the protections at our state levels. We're going to really have to get buy-in from our providers as well, that some things are going to have to be, innovative. Let me just say that some things are going to have to be innovative. So, and I love what Danny just said, that things are already slow to change. So let's take that as a place of hope and potential, because as we start to go into a new legislative session, we want to slow things down. How do we slow things down, right? We bog up the system. Whenever there's an opportunity to leave a comment, you leave 1,000 comments, right? Like we want to slow the system down so that we have a chance we've done our scenario planning for this, right? This is when we we activate those plans. We slow the system down. That way we can get in front of it, right? And make sure that our state-based folks, our state-based leaders have some administrative rules in place that protect us. I think we all are scared right now, right? And we all are like, what if I lose this? What if I lose that? And that's valid. I think that's all valid. But I also, again, want us to tap back into our wins and how we got those wins, right? And how can we sustain those as we move forward? How do we make gender affirming care just a part of the care that people receive? Because if you Google gender affirming care right now, it's going to relate to TGNC people. In my opinion, gender affirming care applies to human beings, right? So as we're talking about our messaging and our language around gender affirming care, I think there's some changes there we should think about in relating a lot of this to humanistic qualities, right? All of us need health care. No matter our gender identity, no matter what we're assigned at birth. And once we draw more levels of commonality with our lawmakers and folks who are coming out with these anti-trans laws, maybe they can see themselves in this too, right? So I know that was all over the place a little bit, but really what I'm saying is I think the fight is at state based. Like I think it's at the state level, and I think we really have to get more involved state level to make sure that we're pushing back on some things and protecting the administrative things that are in place already to protect us.
Thank you. Yes, I do agree. Like, yes, we're trying to work towards also national policy, but it's also important that we don't forget some of the wins that we can have. Like especially with how for here in Washington with the CARES Act that really allowed for a lot of queer and trans people to get access to gender affirming care to be covered as a necessity with their insurance company. Danny, what are some of the things that we should be looking forward to?
Sure. So I'll talk about something that's happening right now and use that as a segue for what I think we can think about. And I think Sai really hit home, which is like focusing on states is really important. And that's where I feel like we can have the most amount of impact in this moment. Federally, currently, there is an amendment to, and this is, we're going to get wonky for a second, the National Defense Authorization Act. It's the bill that pays for the US military. And back in July, Senator Manchin, who is the Democratic, or he formerly Democratic senator from West Virginia, voted out of the Senate committee an amendment to strip all gender affirming care out of the Defense Department, meaning all active duty soldiers and people who receive healthcare through TRICARE, which is some veterans and some veteran spouses. Nobody would be able to access any gender affirming care, period. That was passed by a Democratic committee in the Senate. It was passed by the U.S. House of Representatives, and is in a conference committee. And what a lot of folks have been doing is mobilizing veterans, and I think this is really important, to share their stories with senators' staff. Like, rarely can you get in front of a senator, but empowering and meeting with staffers in Congress to share stories, personal stories about how these changes really impact people. That's families, parents of trans kids, right? It's people who are active duty who are like, I'm going to have to leave. If my health care goes away, I'm going to have to, we had some officers who said they're going to resign their commission. Folks who are enlisted who are like, as soon as my contract is done, I'm out. I think sharing personal stories empowers staffers to then have your face in mind when they go into these very wonky committee meetings and they're not thinking about a person. Like, they're not thinking about Danny, the human in front of them. They're thinking about an issue. Much easier for them to sell us, to just be like, oh, whatever, trans issues, if they're not thinking about a human that they've met. And so I think that that's the thing that over the last 20 years, I've really come to realize is like, overcoming the fear and anxiety and difficulty of going to meet with staffers, because most of the time you're meeting with a staffer anyway, to just share who you are so that your face pops in their mind when they're having these meetings. I've really seen that slow things down in the process of sending in comments, keeping track of what's going on. It really does give those staffers, Republican or Democrat, pause. And that pause, it slows them down, or it takes the vitriol out of them, or it kind of gives them this sort of hesitance that they might not otherwise have. And it sounds really weird, but sometimes they're dealing with so many issues that pause is enough to get us dropped off the bottom, if that makes sense, where it's like they're just going to focus on the things that they can win or that feel emotionally easier. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about. And I've really been inspired I've done 57 meetings in the last month over this. And it's really inspired me to hear people's stories. I get choked up just thinking about some of the things I've heard. And I think it's really the thing that I'm grateful for our whole community is that we're not going to let this stop us. We're going to keep speaking our truth, and that's going to move things forward.
Thank you for her. I think those are some of the important things when we go to advocate for bills, is also ensure that our communities go with us. So a lot of things when we are meeting with staff, it is very rare that we actually get to meet the representative. It's we're always meeting with staff. It's okay. But I've seen faces open up, or eyes really shocked about the reality that our community continues to go through, especially when we're engaging with representatives, because they're normally sitting at a position to where they can dictate to whether what they can support. But when they hear our stories, it's an opportunity to really shift that narrative, that they're only hearing, but not being able to have the opportunity to also hear from the communities that are actually being impacted by these policies. Jill, what are some, I would say, what are some engagements from our Asian trans communities that you're working with how they can be, with how they're currently being engaged with a lot of the policy work?
Yeah, I actually, really want to say that I want my community to be more involved in a lot of these spaces, and in terms of political processes. I think hearing in this room folks with a lot more experience than me being involved in these legislative processes and understanding of political messaging, and I think this really helps. It gives me a lot of hope. At the same time, I want to say, I think I think larger organizations, national level, state organizations, and white queer translator organizations should, I think, involve QT BIPOC communities and organizations more in these opportunities. And I think, as you shared, Danny, I think a lot of us have a lot to say just in terms of our experiences, our own unique experiences coming from corporate communities and trans communities of color. And we want to be in those spaces and have opportunity to advocate on bills, on legislations on the state and national level, and to understand more. And so I think one thing I'm wondering about is something that maybe we can create in Washington State, whether or not there can be opportunity for our community to be in a room to have like a Know Your Rights session where larger organizations that have more of those experiences around laws and rights and around policies and legislative processes be able to provide more prudent information on how communities can support each other and protect ourselves and how we can get involved in these processes. And so it's something I'm starting to see. I think in Washington State, I think there's a lot of organizing here being done on a state level. But at the same time, I think I want to be involved more often, amplify the voices of our community as well.
Thank you, Jill. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for partnership, especially coming up. I know Gender Justice has advocacy training days that we can continue to partner up and really support and have that be a resource for our community to learn what the legislative process is and how they can be engaged. Mariah, as somebody who is doing a lot of the national policy, especially with TLC, what are some key policy battles that are being fought, and where do you see the most potential for like a lot of our locals communities to also be engaged in that national policy advocacy?
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone knows that we are about to go before the Supreme Court to argue the Skermetti case. I think that, right now, our folks are facing, many different battles, but right now it's all over healthcare, right? It's all over, the argument is around gender affirming care access for our youth. And what people don't understand is that moving in the wrong direction, this is going to also eventually impact adults, right? And our ability to also access gender affirming care. I think that, each panelist had, great things to add. So yes, it is about narrative change. It's about telling our story. It's about changing hearts and minds. It's also about making sure that we're creating leadership pathways for folks in policy, for folks in organizing, right? It's also about making sure that our providers, right, have the necessary information, have access to our communities. And as I said, we are going to have to be creative. So this wave of telehealth care that we've seen has been, so helpful to our folks in accessing, the care that they need in areas where affirming care may be in jeopardy or banned altogether, right? And so we look to places like California and New York who have these protections enshrined, right? They've made these protections inalienable in a way, right? And so I think what we have to do is follow suit, right? To organize, to mobilize across the country in states that are able to be moved in that direction to make sure that we match those protections state by state. What's happening is as we move into this new administration, there's going to be a push to have a sweeping executive order that says where we don't want these decisions to be left up to the state. We want to federally mandate this. We want to control bodies. We want to control the lives of people who we believe and who we say in our messaging is that they don't exist, right? They do pose a threat to society, right? And we know that all of that is fed by misinformation, disinformation, and it really rings true to that the fear in people. They play to that, right? And so we have to continuously counter that. One thing that I will say that we really have to do is as a movement, right? One of our weaker spots is that as a movement, we do not have a true coordinated strategy, right? We have our storytellers, we have our organizers, we have our policy arm, we have our grassroots organizers. At no point, yes, we do intersect and we do intersectional work, but true cross movement work, right? We have to tap into that. We have to make sure that we have a true coordinated effort. And that's the way that we'll continue to make progress, even in the face of adversity and everything that we're going to face from what this incoming administration has stated. And so we can't continue to act out of fear. We have to continue to move with the strategy that we've been continuing to develop. And we have to identify areas and gaps where they're infiltrating, right? A big part of this is because they're infiltrating our movement from different areas, right? And so, yeah, I think we just have to continue to look to where great work is being done, pulling from those examples, implementing that in areas where we're able to, right? And continuing to move resources to those most impacted, whether that be getting them out of there or getting resources in to our folks. I can just say for myself, I don't care how bad it gets here in Louisiana with our governor. This is my home and I will not leave. And so I'm going to stay here. I'm going to be an example, living and breathing every day. You know, I have a Trump supporting neighbor that lives right next door to me, has this big old ugly flag outside. But every day that he sees me living and breathing and vibrant and showing up, I think it moves him just a little bit to say, wow, this is my neighbor. She owns a home right next to me. So the narrative starts to change because the things that I think he's hearing on television, when he encounters and interacts with me, he's experiencing something totally different. So yeah, I think there are many different ways that we address what we're experiencing. I think we all have a different role to play. National organizations play a key role in making sure that local, state, and grassroots organizations are supported. Because without our grassroots partners, we won't be able to get this work done. And yeah, I think that's the key.
Thank you so much. I think you touched on a lot of like important issues with how we can effectively work together versus working in silos, especially when we're trying to move policies. Also acknowledging that there are other states who don't have the privilege. If you're someone in here in Washington, I would say confidently, you're pretty set. We're okay. We have very strong leaderships that were elected for the next couple of years, which allows us to really focus on more of the national policy work towards federal. I think those are like important conversations, not only organizers, but also leaders need to continue to have is how can we learn from each other to really support other states who don't have access to gender affirming care, where reproductive care is also challenged in their states. I guess this next question goes into like how can the trans communities and its allies or accomplices build broader coalition to push for policy change towards equity, human rights, and diversity. Sebastian, if you want to start us off.
Sure, I'll jump out there. It's one thing that everybody's mentioned, but Mariah said it best just a second ago. I think this like the disinformation and misinformation is so key. And I think it's not only important for us as trans folks to be talking about our real life existences, how we're moving in the world, but also our allies and our co-conspirators and our accomplices, all of the things that, all of the folks who support us, too, while you cannot necessarily you're not a trans person, you can't speak to that, that's not your lived experience. However, you're supporting our community, you have privilege and access in ways that we may not have access. We talk about this metaphorical seat at the table all the time. And a lot of times we can't get in those doors. So it is the responsibility of our allies and our co-conspirators to be taking those stories into those rooms. Or better yet, how about open the door and let me walk through so I can tell my own story, right? So I think again, really the drive to end a lot of misinformation and disinformation is a great way to push policy change because as Danny mentioned, right, when you connect, and I said it too, when you connect something that, not just to the issue, but to a human being. I had just a short story. I had an HVAC person, cisgender black guy, come in the house a few weeks ago, and we got into a conversation, and ultimately the reason my furnace had went out is something to do with Democrats. I don't know. That's what his reasoning. And then also, was his exact words is that we should vote a certain way because Kamala's plan is for all transgenders to have surgery. This man said this, was bold enough to say this while standing right in my home, not knowing who he was talking to. So right then I had a decision to make in my own home. Do I out myself and could potentially make myself unsafe? Or do I go ahead and tell this man where he can go and how to get there? So I chose the latter, right? In my very own, because you're not going to do that in my very own home. I'm going to tell you exactly what the truth is, exactly who you're talking to, and as we said, how you can see people's eyes open, like it was like a cloud, a veil that just had lifted off his head when I told him I was a transgender man. And then we went into a whole nother conversation about the commonality here is that we're black folks, right? So if I couldn't sway him on anything trans, right? If I couldn't change his heart and mind about anything trans, I was able to draw that commonality of us both being black. And regardless of what society knows about or what they perceive about me, the one thing they know is that I'm a black man because that's what they see. And in that is commonality with me and this cisgender guy. And we were able to talk about what that meant and how we both deserve protections. I just happened to have another route to manhood than what he is. That's the only difference between him and I. So again, I think it's really important that that we have not only trans folks themselves combating disinformation and misinformation, but also our allies and co-conspirators, because that is a great way to make policy change.
Thank you. Jill, what are some of your thoughts about like the narrative shifts that's needed, especially with our AA and NHPI communities, with how we continue to show up and support our queer and trans people?
Yeah, I think something that everyone here has heard is the fact that I think allyship is so important, and also that it's so important for um for cis people to just see trans queer people as humans and drawing on that humanity. And I feel like that's true in every community, and just drawing on my own experience. When I first immigrated to this country, I was very isolated, and I was at the very depth of my depression. I started my own transitioning at that time as well, 10 years ago. And just looking back, and I don't think I can make it to this day without, the support of these people who are in my life. That I think about how much my husband has supported me, as well as his family. And when I first came out to his family, it was what they said was just that, how much they love me. They saw me as human, and they saw the qualities in me that they liked. And me being trans was not a place we started off with. And so there are trans people in every community. It's important to draw on that humanity piece with allies, and something that I'm seeing more and more positively, I think, within API community is that there's more acceptance, there's more inclusivity of queer trans people in API spaces. And one of the things that Asian Trans Sisters have been doing is that we're supporting this project to tell the story of historical and historic fictional queer trans people in Asian cultures. To show that queer trans people have existed for thousands of years in the narratives and in reality of Asian cultures. And so we have always been here, and we will continue to be in API communities. I think about how important visibility is. I don't think that we can really let people see us as true human beings if we don't let them see that even though you are trans, you are like everyone else, and that we share like so much commonality in terms of the cultural connections, et cetera, and just connecting on a human base. And I feel like that's something that's been echoed here, and I feel like that's going to be the key in terms of shifting narratives.
Thank you, Jill, for sharing. Danny, I know you've done this for so many years, especially with coalitions. Is what can we learn with all the work that you've done to how we can build really strong coalition, especially partnerships for doing this work?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you to Mariah and Sai and Jill. I feel like all of you have really touched on just so many things that really resonate with me. I've been thinking a lot about like where there have been successes in Washington State and where there have been challenges. And I recently watched a documentary about a book called Bowling Alone by Professor Robert Putnam. And the book, in summary, says that, democracy is getting more difficult because people are not participating in groups as much. That's like the thesis of his book. I don't know that I necessarily agree or, I don't have strong feelings about his book, but it kind of triggered this thing for me, which is like, as Jill just said, 9 years ago, I started joining reproductive justice and domestic violence and sexual assault coalitions. Not because Gender Justice League was doing that work yet, but because I felt like trans folks needed to be in those spaces to be a part of the conversation, to hear what was going on, to contribute to what we were seeing and hearing from folks that we're working with in community, and to learn, to just get a sense. And it has been really transformative. I think one of the stories about how the Gender Affirming Treatment Act in Washington State got passed, how we got Apple Health coverage, which is our state Medicaid program, private health insurance, et cetera. A huge part of that was relationships with reproductive justice organizations, folks who are trying to increase access to abortion. And we've kind of found a lot of crossover around Catholic hospital mergers. We put forward a really big bill last year, which unfortunately didn't quite make it, but trying to create oversight to these mergers. Catholic hospital chains are buying up all of the private hospitals in Washington State to then ban access to abortion and gender affirming care, which a lot of people don't know about. They use their religious exemption to then say we're not providing that care, and we can't sue them for discrimination because they have a First Amendment right to not provide care. And just learning about some of those issues and finding the overlap where obviously that really impacts gender affirming care access. 84% of all hospitals in Washington State are owned by Catholic health systems. So as progressive as our laws might be, if there's no hospitals to have surgery in, how do we have access, right? And those are such like sophisticated ways to marginalize care. And if I had not been part of those other groups, listening to the work that they were doing, I don't know that I would have been able to think about and bring to the community like, hey, we need to get our focus on this issue because it's really going to impact how we're accessing care. Like I had facial feminization surgery at a Catholic hospital in Seattle, Swedish Provident Healthcare. The only reason why it's allowed is because they were sued by the ACLU and they had to sign a consent decree. So they have to provide gender affirming care. But if that hospital ever changes hands again, no more gender affirming care at Swedish. So it's kind of, I think, joining groups is this really powerful way of, and like Jill said, being in AAPI communities, right? Like I'm proud member of the Penobscot Nation, and I go to a lot of different Native American coalition meetings here in DC and learn so much in those spaces that are really relevant and speak to a lot of the overlap of healthcare access issues, dealing with federal government bureaucracy, dealing with tribal sovereignty and like nation to nation relationships. And that has really deepened my wisdom about how I can bring that back to trans communities. So I think that's the other thing is just trying to find ways and places where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable, where you can learn and grow, and where you have opportunities and kind of thinking about that. So that's just something that kind of has come to mind in all of these stories and everything that we've been sharing.
Thank you so much for sharing, Danny. I picked up one thing for you were talking about like being in spaces. And I'm all of a sudden reminded that with a lot of the organizing that TLC, that with Mariah, that have been doing with community, really building the leadership of our trans community. It's Mariah, how has that been looking like? And are there opportunities for our communities, like how Amasai was able to organize with you folks in the future that our trans communities can be involved with?
Yeah, so I think coalition work is key, right? And not just coalition work that is aligned or built using identity politics, right? It's got to be a true cross movement, cross issue, cross community coalition. I recently attended the Rising Majority in St. Louis, and it was a very diverse group of organizers, activists, organizations. And although we both had our values were broad, right? Not all of us were values aligned, but at some point there was something that we connected on, and we were able to make an agreement that even though we weren't completely aligned on every single issue, we could make a commitment to work together, right? To not radicalize us in a way that left us vulnerable, right? To work together to create a strategy that can move the moderate, population more to the left than to the right, so that when the time comes, we would be able to organize this broad base of folks to influence votes, to influence representatives, to organize around ballot measures, to move resources, right? Because the idea is that we say that we need each other, but we really don't act as if we need each other because we're not willing to work together. And so building a broad coalition, right, is going to be key in making sure that we have the representation, number one, that we need, that we're able to get into rooms, if not ourselves, and we have competent allies that are able to access these rooms, right? And that we have placement where we need placement. I think that a lot of times we're left on the outside rather than the inside because we don't have proper placement, whether it be due to a lack of expertise or a lack of connectivity. And so I think this is going to be key. One of the things I also believe is that, our community, and this is something that I'm really speaking internally about, is that our community really needs to understand harmful versus helpful narratives. I know that our community wants people to understand that we're under attack. I know that our community wants people to know that folks are in pain and that folks need things. But I also don't think that folks understand that when we're talking about messaging on a national level, this is an extremely harmful narrative, right? And it's one that the GOP and the conservative right, that's a talking point that they want us to continue using, right? And so I think that it's going to be extremely beneficial for narrative change trainings, harmful versus helpful narrative work. That's going to be instrumental right now, and it needs to start right now about how we're speaking about ourselves, how we're speaking about our communities, and how we're speaking about our future if we are trying to move the needle forward in terms of positive, impactful legislation, enshrining our rights in the states that we can, and fighting in the courts.
Thank you so much, Mariah. I think you said it beautifully when you talked about the narrative, especially with the narrative shift work that we need to continue to have, especially with spaces that we as organizers can continue to organize and be with community, that we have a shared narrative that really uplifts our community, to really educate people about our lived realities and experiences. Um, Given with how like incredibly diverse our communities are, what are some ways that we can uplift and support all our trans siblings, especially those from underrepresented communities and spaces where trans diversity may not fully be acknowledged, whether it be through personal experience or political action? Like, what are some strategies that wonderful folks who've done this work, who's been in community, especially with a lot of the grassroots organizings that folks do, have you found effective, that will be also helpful for people who are attending today, where ensuring that all our communities' voices are heard and valued?
I think,
I can.
go ahead, Jill. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Jill, please.
Yeah, I want to say I think just hearing that question, I think it's really important to lean into supporting mutual aid and supporting peer-based support and supporting grassroots movement to build community. That's something that I've found is really impactful. I think that there are a lot of fights that are happening on the larger scale, on the federal scale, national and state level organizing, but a lot of times it's small, community level support that really makes an individual impact, and that's something that I've found in my own experience. I came into the Pacific Northwest area having not known any other, Pan-Asian trans identify in person, and I know the impact that had on me to being in spaces where I don't have those networks and connections, and having connections with people who share my lived experience, and then know how much just organizing Asian transistors has meant to me, and I've seen in real examples and the impact that you had on folks in the group, just in terms of eliminating those isolations and building bridges between people and community. And so I think wondering whether or not there can be more support and funding and also resource level and capacity level support coming from larger movement to really support smaller grassroots and community organizing movements, so that people have an easier time to find communities.
And just to add to what Jill is saying, I think it's also is really along the same line and thing that TLC and other groups are doing amazing work at is pouring into trans leadership too as well, right? Having folks want to see themselves represented, in these particular conversations. They want to see themselves represented in their state legislatures. That's another way that we can make sure we get, we had some wins there too, y'all. We had some trans folks, that did win their races, who are in office, who are and will be in Congress and all of these things, right? So I think that seeing those folks and seeing people on these larger scales, seeing us, seeing me, Danny, Mariah, all of us that are here doing this work and being visible also uplifts that community of folks that we often don't hear from, right? So they see that there are other folks that are standing in the gap, standing up and being loud. So that motivates them to also do the same thing in their areas as well. And I think also too, the education gap. Like we have to close that education gap as it relates to policy, procedure, and government because it is made to confuse us, y'all. It's made to confuse us. It's made to confuse you so bad that you want to give up and not participate at all. And the more that we can break those things down into bite-sized chunks for our community, where it's palatable, where they understand it, layman language. What does this mean? What's going to happen after inauguration day? What is the first thing we expect? After break these policies down into bite-sized language where our community understands, more folks I think would be more amped to join these fights, to contact their legislatures. Constituent contact is one of the main amazing ways we can push policy change. And I think there's a fear there with our community with even doing that outreach, right? So just that public education piece, I believe, will uplift people too because they'll feel more armed for the attack, right? So that's what I'm speaking about. Our national organizations arming our state-based and our grassroots folks with the education they need, the tools they need so they can fight right in their local communities because there are little local rural pockets of us that we cannot forget about, in places that we cannot forget about. I say it all the time, yeah, I live in Atlanta, but Atlanta is not Georgia. As soon as I step outside of Atlanta, as soon as I step outside of Atlanta, I'm in a whole different world, right? And you would be mistaken if you don't think TGNC people live in those red counties that surround me here in Atlanta because they do, right? So again, I think it's really important that we educate our folks so they feel more prepared for the fight and they can have those fights on the local level. And I think it's up to us national organs, national folks to provide folks with that type of guidance. So that's one of the things I think we can do to really support our trans siblings and really uplift folks to use their voices more.
Thank you, Sebastian. Danny, what are some ways that you found useful with how our personal experiences and strategies that ensures that everyone's voices are heard and valued in a lot of the policy efforts that we continue to do?
Yeah, I think I've thought a lot about, Gender Justice League has a very unique model of as an organization. We run Trans Pride Seattle. We do gender-based violence and work with survivors of crimes, hate crimes, discrimination, and then we do policy work. It's not a usual configuration for orgs to do those three things. And I think what we kind of came to realize is having multiple different types of events. And I think Utopia does this beautifully as well, right? Where the point of entry into advocacy can be hangouts and socials. It can be support groups. It can be pride events. It can be ball events. It can be a lot of different things. And I think part of what I've thought a lot about is creating the opportunity for people to show up in a lot of different ways with a lot of different interests and a lot of opportunity for us to meet each other and hear about each other's lives and get to know each other, that it's through those relationships and those opportunities to work together and meet each other that sort of community building and connection is then what sort of helps to support people, it helps to sort of folks who are leaders to feel more connected and brought in, if that makes sense, to then identify the folks that they can, either have as mentors or work with or be inspired by. That's a really key thing is leadership comes from so many different venues that there isn't just one way. Like it's not just advocacy day at the State House, right? That's not like the only time that we do leadership building. It's also volunteer opportunities to run Trans Pride and making sure, that it's new folks who are being brought in to like help lead stuff all the time. I think a lot about that having a lot of different opportunities for people to show up with their passion, the things that they care about or that they want to do, is the way that we can help or to meet their needs. That's the other piece, right? Sorry. The other piece is when we're meeting people's needs, like when we work with survivors, also another way that survivors can get connected to advocacy work is they learn about our organization, they follow us, they hear about what's going on, and then they take action because they, have gotten their immediate needs met. Maybe they're in a safer place, they're feeling more stably housed, they're feeling safer, and then they're like, I want to change things for other people so they don't go through what I went through. That's like another way that we can do it, right? Meeting people's needs, creating spaces for us to see each other and have community. That's like a lot of what I've been thinking about the last 12 or 13 years, is like doing all of those things.
Thank you for sharing, Danny. Hear a lot of story collection and being with community and forming community. And we know how vital story collection is to this work, and especially getting our community stories out to those that really do need to hear it. Mariah, what are some community storytelling practices that I know like at a national level that really covers such a huge area, especially with 50 states? What are some story collection practices that can really help support your work and efforts from a lot of grassroots organizers or local organizations who are currently present here today?
Yeah, so at TLC, we have a couple of different programs, such as Positively Trans, which is led by our senior national organizer, Tiami Luckett, which is a program that not only collects and documents the stories of trans folks living with HIV, but also does a storytelling series and also trainings on how to tell your story and how to talk to the media regarding your story. And so that's one thing we do is not only just the collection of stories, it's about making sure our folks have the skills to actually tell their stories right, effectively, right, and in a way that is comfortable for them. We all have different ways that we relay our message and that we tell our stories. Um, with Black Trans Circles, we often do these short vignettes, and it's like a snapshot of the overarching theme of one's experience, right? So it may be one thing or two things that really captures the essence of who someone is based off what they've been through. But what we try to get folks to understand is that, it's essential and it's important that not only do we tell our stories, but that we archive our stories. That's how we preserve our legacies. That's how we are able to let folks know that one's existed before us. I know before we actually had, these visuals of our elders telling their stories, these stories were relayed through word of mouth, right? They were relayed through journaling and things like that. So we're really in this era now where we're seeing a lot more visibility of stories being told through fiction and nonfiction, right? We're seeing the recreation of a version of one's life, right? Um, and so I think that's, where we are is right not only knowing how impactful storytelling is, but how important it's going to be for future generations to be able to access the stories, right? The experiences of not only us on this very call, but those who came before us, and how they're going to then use that to carry on the work that we leave behind, right? So yeah, I think, that's one of the things that we're doing is archiving our stories, making sure that also folks have access to these stories. um, and have access to it in a way where they can't distort it or weaponize it and use it for their for counter purposes, right? Use it against us, right? So that goes back to how we're speaking about ourselves in an impenetrable way, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mariah, and thank you for really highlighting about like, yes, the story collection piece, also telling piece, also the need for us to really document and archive our history so that way our future generations can also learn about a lot of the movement work that we've done as a community. But as we're doing this, it's also like I really appreciate that you really highlighted on like the importance of also protecting our stories, that it also isn't used against us. Ah, that's phenomenal. Thank you, everyone. I think this was such wonderful conversations. We've heard range of things from narrative shifts to education to building our community leadership, to also building our community and educating them with a lot of these moving pieces. But as we're doing this work, it's also important that we're also fortifying a lot of the wins that we already have. For this next piece, it's kind of like our Q&A section. If any of our folks who are attending have questions, please drop them in the comment box. We'll probably I'm trying to be mindful of time, and I'll be happy to share that with our panelists. We have one that came in. We can just popcorn it. It's recognizing that blue states will be safer moving into these 4 years. It's how can we individually, as a movement, aid our siblings and community in red state in more immediate and impactful way.
Um, I don't know if I actually agree that blue states will be safer. Um, I think that there are, when we think about safety, it's relative, right? Because within blue states, you do have very conservative areas, you have rural areas, you have areas where the values really shift and change, right? Like out to Louisiana, for example, you have highly democratic areas like New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Monroe, Louisiana, Shreveport, but we also have sundown towns, right? And so, you know, safety is relative, right, to where you are, and then that's physical safety. But then you also have, are you safe policy wise? I know if something passes in Baton Rouge, the capital, I know that to a certain extent I'm safe within the city of New Orleans because there are certain protections and values that are also enshrined locally here. That grant me though a certain level of protection, right? Um, as it relates to my employment and things like that, if I work at a local company that is tied directly to city dollars for whatever reason. So I think that, when we talk about safety, it's relative to where you actually live within that specific state, and who your representatives are, the attitude and the climate on the ground. All of those things play a part when we talk about safety. Because what we know is that violence can happen anywhere at any time, whether it's state-based or sanctioned violence, whether it's intimate partner violence, and it happens every couple of minutes. So I think what we can do is continue to support our grassroots movement and our grassroots organizers. I think that we need to stop the deprioritization of direct service organizations and continue to move resources to direct service organizations. I think we have this idea that, folks just wake up and become movement leaders and organizers. But the truth is that a lot of our youth are unhoused and need resources, and we want our youth leaders to become, these brilliant leaders that succeed us and that, lead us into the future. But what about the support that they need as youth? We're seeing an unprecedented amount of youth who are unhoused, who are going back into the chosen family model, right? Especially in the South, right? And so we need to make sure that we're prioritizing organizations that give them that safety that we're speaking about that they need, but also that love and support that they need. At this current moment, we know that the youth suicide hotlines are up 700%. And so what resources around the country do we have to meet folks where they are, right? There's only so much that you can do on a phone. Sometimes saving a life means actually getting to that person in real time, right? A physical touch, a physical conversation, right? So yeah, I think that, it's relative, and I think that we have to really keep at the forefront of our minds that violence can happen to any one of us, no matter whether we're in New York, California, or Switzerland.
Thank you for sharing, Mariah. We have a participant that didn't have a specific question. Nadine, I don't know if you wanted to come off mic and comment or share, or if you were going, but if you do, please do so.
Okay, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. I'm in Portland, and that was a good point, Sebastian, like what you said. Like, Portland is, we have all kinds of mix of people, all of that diversity, but once you get out of the metro area, it's a completely, different scene. But I think, last month I participated in a conference with Neighborhood Partnership, and what we really talked about was just economic justice and changing the narrative, because there's such an overlap, like you were saying, Daniel. I mean, in different spaces. um and I think, the key is to, get that conversation out there, because I think, there's so many trans people that, are just under the radar. Maybe some of them, don't feel comfortable with just the LGBTQ. There's a different space. And then also, with healthcare, um, you know, luckily, we have some things in place, in Portland, and, with different organizations. But you really bring up, a good point, Danny, with, the owning of hospitals, because, I come from a healthcare background. And right now, I mean, just healthcare in general, it's a mess. We've got doctors going on strike, people dropping out. I mean, all of that. But I think, trying to advance the narrative is, getting out there with the education, and having that visibility, because we really count on those healthcare providers that do provide the care, and the people that do provide the access, but a lot of times, that gets, it's just, there seems to be a hierarchy as far as, prioritizing, when you're getting into that spaces. So I think it's really going to start from, having the safe spaces, being able to, connect to people on, a real level. Um, but I'm hopeful. But at the same time, we have to use discernment, as far as, not, um, you know, becoming these targets. But it really is just having that representation and that human experience to, be in touch and be in front of those people. Because most people, they're not, they're going to go along with, oh yeah, somebody said this and somebody said that. But guess what? You know, um, so, you know, and I'm going to be spending my winter months in Hawaii. I'm native Hawaiian, and so there's a lot of that talk, but also, like, in my own family, I have two brothers that are absolutely homophobic, and one of his sons is gay. So there's still that narrative, whether it's religious, or trying to get back to the family model, you know
That's awesome.
so yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nadine.
Really quickly, Adrian, I wanted to say something. Nadine, that was great. I think you talked a lot about like the overlapping impact of many communities, and how there are many of us that, are represent many things, and where that intersection is. So thank you so much for highlighting that. But I also, really quickly, before we go, I wanted to talk about something about the question in the chat and what Gordon posed to that. I believe that's one of the things in which that we can do to like support our communities in an immediate and impactful way, is this mass movement of resource sharing, right? Like, so especially around ID documents, y'all. When the year, even before inauguration get here, pre-filing is gonna start in January. I'm sorry, in December. Pre-filing the bill is gonna already start, and it has already started in some places. But the most of it, we're gonna see a lot of it in December. The tax are gonna be under deferment care. But we're going to have a lot of text on ID document changes. And we have to get in front of those types of things right now. So I think mass resource sharing of how folks can get documents, the ID documents that accurately reflect them. And not only that, it's not free. So we need some mutual aid. We need folks that are willing to pay for these things. We need more passport name change, gender marker change clinics, because that provides a level of safety that folks who have ID documents that match how they present don't understand, right? Don't understand that that's a privilege, and don't understand that that's also a barrier in some of our folks, like voting. Of some of our folks are not going to show up to vote because their ID does not match how they present. So again, I think one of the ways that we can immediately do that, Gordon, is what you put, is in the states that we have that are safe. Start building more resources for folks that want to move there, right? Start making our own communities, right, that folks are safe in. Not only that, mass resource sharing, so trans and gender nonconforming folks, all of us people, human beings, can tap into the resources they need, especially around ID documents and how to get those things changed. Passport changes right now is easy, all of that stuff, right? So I think mass resource sharing is something that we can do right now, all of us, that can really jump in front of this to keep our folks safe.
Thank you for sharing that, Sebastian, about resource sharing. I think that's like very important with how we want people to show up for a lot of the storytelling, but it's also very important that we're also caring for our community, and ensuring that their basic needs are met.
And I would just, as somebody who was targeted for when I tried to change my passport, I would just urge people, if you qualify for a passport, if you need or want a passport, even if you want a passport card, which is like a federal card, it's only useful in, I guess, going to Canada or Mexico, but you can use it for job applications and stuff. I would just urge you, like a personal plea, as somebody who really went through it in 2018, do that under the Biden administration if you can, because it's so, as I found out, horrifically subjective. And it's very easy to get tied up, and federal identity documents are no joke. I went through some drama around it, and it can be very serious. So yeah, we're also thinking about doing another. We did a name change clinic. I think we raised $45,000 in 2016 and like helped 286 people in Seattle, King County. And I'm hoping to do that again. It was a lot to pull off, and we have to get community partners, lawyers, other orgs to kind of do it together. But I'm hoping that we can do that in Washington State again to sort of help people. But it's really, I think, Sai, you really raise it, and I didn't anticipate the trouble that I would get into, and it was drama. So super important for people to do that while they can.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add to that. Thank you for flagging that, Danny. That just made me remember one of the things that we talked about, and I'm sorry I couldn't find the hand raise button. I haven't been on Zoom in like 4 months. So one thing to keep in mind is that after January 20th, we know that there are going to be a lot of like mandatory reporting. So to Danny's point, if you try to apply for certain things, there's a great likelihood that you'll be reported, names will be taken down, there will be targeting, possibly doxing, which will lead to that further violence that we're seeing. We also know that recently, although it didn't pass the House, there was a tax exemption bill that was put forth to strip tax exempt organizations that were labeled as terrorist organizations. We know that that was intended for trans-led organizations, racial justice organizations, and we know that that bill will likely be reintroduced in a later session. So also making sure that we're doing what we have to do internally to structure and restructure our organizations to safeguard what we have and what we're acquiring, and also to make sure that we keep our folks employed so that they can continue to do this work. So there's a lot of things that we have to be on the lookout for, but also be proactive around. So yeah, and as I put in the chat, TLC will be hosting an ID clinic at Creating Change. So I know that it's kind of close to that date, but if you can get it in, we need to get it in. Mhm.
And especially if you're an immigrant that's going through the naturalization process. As someone who's went through it, things was a little easy for me going through it through the Biden administration, but we also don't know what that will look like for a lot of our immigrant siblings and community who'll be navigating that process, whether it be through for naturalizations or getting a green card. If you have the capacity or the ability, or if you need support, you can reach out, or you can also probably possibly start having that conversation of navigating that process.
I see a question in the chat. My daughter has put off her official name change, which requires going to court. Is it too late? No, absolutely not. In some states, you can walk in if you put in your petition and they've done the background check and it's come back clear. You can just walk in and a sitting judge can sign it and you can take it straight over to Social Security. But you have to be mindful in certain states, there are certain steps. So in Louisiana, after you obtain the judgment petition, you have to take it to Social Security, then you have to wait 24 hours, and then you take it to the DMV, and so on. In some states like New York that have always just had this, they've been much more advanced and progressive. You can do it in any order you want. But yeah, just it's important to know which order they require you to go in. But yes, I would say go tomorrow.
Thank you, Mariah. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. This concludes our Talanoa panel for today. We'll definitely be sending out the video link for our conversation. But if you also have questions for our panelists, please send them my way, and I can send them your questions and connect you with any of our panelists that can help provide you with that support, educations, or ways that you can be engaged. Again, thank you all for being here today and for your commitment to making a difference. Together, we can ensure that trans voices are heard and trans lives are valued. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.